At a family dinner meant to celebrate her birthday, Rachel sat quietly as her younger sister, Ivy, stood up and announced, "I'm pregnant with Caleb's baby." Caleb, Rachel's husband, didn't even flinch. He leaned back and added, "She's everything you're not, warm, giving, real." Their mother laughed. Their father called it a blessing in disguise. No one noticed Rachel's hands weren't shaking. She simply raised her glass and said, "To betrayal. May it rot beautifully." What no one knew was that Rachel had spent months preparing for this moment. And now she had all the power, documents, leverage, and one hell of a plan. Rachel Harris turned 33 that evening. She wore a soft navy blue dress, her hair swept back, a touch of rose gloss on her lips. Always composed, always reliable, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, RSVP'd on time, and ironed her clothes the night before. Across from her sat her husband, Sean, sipping from a glass of Merlot. And beside him, her younger sister Kayla, carefree, magnetic, wrapped in a tight red dress and glowing with the attention she always seemed to command. Their parents had flown in for the occasion. Her mother, Eleanor, had already made 3 passive remarks about Rachel not having children yet. Her father, Martin, had ignored most of the conversation, scrolling through his phone under the table. The waitress brought out a small chocolate soufflé with a candle in the center. Everyone clapped politely. Then Kayla stood. "I have a surprise," she said, grinning wide. "I'm pregnant." Everyone turned toward her. With Sean's baby. For a few seconds, no one breathed. Then, incredibly, Eleanor clapped a hand over her heart and beamed. "Oh, honey, finally a real grandchild." Martin muttered, "Guess at least one of you figured out how to keep a man." Rachel stared at them. Her eyes didn't blink. Her hands were still in her lap. Her voice came out even quiet. "You've rehearsed this moment, haven't you?" The laughter stopped. Kayla's smile faltered just slightly. Sean shifted uncomfortably. The candle's flame danced between them like a line waiting to be crossed. Rachel looked at each of them, mother, father, sister, husband, and in that moment, something inside her didn't break. It cleared. This wasn't shock. It was confirmation. They had shown her who they really were. And she wasn't going to run from it. Not this time. Rachel didn't scream. She didn't cry or throw her wine. She simply picked up her purse, looked at each face at the table, the man she married, the sister she once protected, the parents who never really saw her, and said calmly, "Enjoy the rest of your evening." Then she walked out of the restaurant, heels tapping softly against the marble floor. The night air was cool and still. As Rachel stood outside, staring into the city lights of Austin, she let out one long breath. Not of sadness, but relief. Because she had been preparing for this. 9 months earlier, she had sensed the shift. Sean was always working late, but his ties smelled of unfamiliar perfume. Kayla had grown evasive, her laugh more brittle, her text replies slower. Rachel hadn't confronted anyone. She had observed. Quietly. Carefully. With the help of her friend Lena, a corporate attorney with a sharp instinct for betrayal, Rachel hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus, and he was thorough. Discreet snapshots of hotel lobbies. Screen captures of emails. Bank transactions. Sean paying for Kayla's flight to Miami for a conference. The same weekend he told Rachel he was at a leadership retreat. Flashbacks flicker, Rachel alone in her study, scanning documents under warm lamplight. Lena reviewing papers over takeout. Rachel watching her sister post selfies with captions like, "Finding myself," while knowing exactly who she was losing in the process. The house Rachel lived in? Purchased 2 years ago in her maiden name, using the trust fund her grandmother had left. A trust fund Eleanor always said was too much responsibility for Rachel. But Rachel had invested it wisely. Quietly. She owned the house. She had $1.8 million in secure accounts. And the prenuptial agreement, written with Lena's help, protected every penny. Sean had no claim. She had waited not because she was weak, but because she wanted to be certain. Because Rachel believed in truth more than vengeance. And now that truth had revealed itself, it was time to let consequences do what her tears never could. The next morning, Rachel arrived at her parents' house, not with fury, but with calm. The same house she used to run to after scraped knees and spelling bee wins. It felt smaller now, dimmer. Frank and Eleanor sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. As if the night before hadn't shattered everything. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. Instead, she stood in the doorway and asked simply, "Did you ever want 2 daughters? Or just one to praise, and one to blame?" Silence. Eleanor let out a dismissive sigh. "Rachel, don't be dramatic. You've always been so intense." Frank didn't even look up from his paper. "You were always hard to love. So closed off. So serious. You never made things easy." Rachel blinked, not from tears, but from recognition. This wasn't new. This was the same quiet erosion that had followed her since childhood. Kayla cried, and arms opened. Rachel achieved, and the room stayed silent. Eleanor continued, almost impatiently, "Kayla needed us more. You were always fine on your own. You were the responsible one." Rachel took a breath and let it settle deep. It finally made sense. The patterns, the omissions, the way her victories were brushed aside while Kayla's smallest efforts were celebrated like miracles. It wasn't favoritism. It was survival. They had chosen who to shelter and who to lean on. And Rachel, always steady, had become the emotional dumping ground. The dependable daughter. The invisible one. "I wasn't fine," she said quietly. "You just never asked. And I was too loyal to tell you the truth." Frank scoffed again, but Rachel was already turning to leave. She paused only once at the door, her voice low but certain. "Loyalty without love is just self-betrayal. I've spent my life trying to earn what should have been given freely. I won't do it anymore." And just like that, she walked out, not angry, not broken, just free. 3 days later, a meeting was scheduled at a quiet downtown office. Rachel arrived early, composed in a slate gray dress, her hair pinned back. She looked like someone who had stopped asking for approval and started claiming power. Sean and Kayla walked in together, matching smug grins. Kayla even wore white, as if she were auditioning for the role of new wife. Sean didn't even look at Rachel. He just settled into the leather chair, lacing his fingers like a man who thought he'd won. But they weren't alone. Lena, Rachel's lawyer and longtime friend, entered the room with a leather folder and a quiet fire in her eyes. Rachel began softly, "This isn't about revenge. It's about clarity." Lena laid out the documents. "First," she said, sliding over the house deed. "The home you've been living in? Purchased solely under Rachel's maiden name through a trust. Sean, your name was never on it. You'll need to vacate by the end of the month." Sean stiffened. "Second, the prenup," Lena continued, tapping the next sheet. "As you know, infidelity nullifies any financial claim. We have proof of your affair. Photos. Receipts. Hotel bookings. All dated. You get nothing." Kayla leaned forward, face paling. "You're bluffing." Lena didn't blink. "Try us." Rachel's voice was calm. "Third, I've accepted a position in Seattle. Senior strategist. $300,000 base salary, full relocation, and a signing bonus. I start next month." Sean's mouth parted, but no words came. Kayla's smirk, the one she'd worn so easily at dinner, dissolved into disbelief. "You thought I'd fall apart," Rachel said, looking at both of them. "But I've been building this exit for months. While you played games, I made plans." The room fell still. Even the ticking clock on the wall felt louder. Rachel stood. "You betrayed a woman who already knew. And worse, you underestimated her." As she walked out, Lena behind her, Sean whispered, "Wait, Rachel, we can fix." But the door had already closed. The air was crisp that morning as Rachel pulled into the quiet neighborhood where Aunt Celia lived. The porch light was still on, casting a soft glow over the flower boxes Celia kept blooming, no matter the season. Inside, the old house smelled faintly of chamomile tea and lavender, comforting, warm, like a childhood memory that hadn't soured with time. Celia, now in her late 70s but still sharp and elegant, welcomed Rachel with open arms and a knowing smile. "No more pretending today?" Celia asked gently. Rachel shook her head, sitting down on the floral-patterned couch she'd curled up on so many summers ago. I just needed to be somewhere real, Rachel whispered, her voice trembling at the edges. Somewhere not twisted in guilt or betrayal. Celia poured tea, her movements steady, unhurried. Your grandmother used to say, some people only know how to love when it's easy. But the ones who matter? They love you even when you make it hard. Rachel looked down at her hands. They never chose me. Not once. It was always Kayla. Always excuses for her. I was the reliable one, the invisible one. Celia's eyes softened. You were never second best, Rachel. They just had blindfolds on, the kind stitched together with their own selfishness. She leaned forward, placing a hand on Rachel's knee. But you kept showing up. Loving them. Hoping they'd see you. That takes more strength than they'll ever understand. Rachel blinked back tears. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. You were born to the wrong audience, sweetheart, Celia said with a quiet laugh. But that doesn't make your story any less worthy. It was in that moment, in the warmth of a home where she was simply wanted, that Rachel's grief finally softened into clarity. Her worth wasn't rooted in who abandoned her. It bloomed from who she chose to become. She smiled for the first time in days. Not for anyone else. Just for herself. One quiet Saturday morning, Rachel sat by the window of her new apartment in Seattle, watching the mist roll over the Sound. The city felt different, freer. A place untouched by her past, where her name wasn't attached to anyone else's shadow. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Local nurse under investigation for relationship with senior physician. Rachel's heart paused mid-beat. It was Kayla. The article was vague but damning enough. Allegations of inappropriate relationships, multiple HR complaints, and ethical concerns regarding patient assignments. The name of her attending physician, one Rachel remembered hearing in passing months ago, stood out like a red flag finally being acknowledged. A second message arrived moments later. This time from Lena. Sean was officially let go. They traced the expense reports. He was charging weekend hotel stays and flights to the company card. Rachel stared at the screen, expressionless. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just a strange, still silence, like the eye of a storm that had finally passed. She clicked on a third message. We miss you. Your mom and I talk about you a lot. Maybe you could come home sometime. The word caught in her throat. The same people who once called her too cold, too difficult to love, and praised her sister for giving the family what it needed, were now reaching out, not because they saw her, but because they lost what they'd placed above her. Rachel didn't type anything. Didn't even start a draft. Some answers don't need to be spoken. Some doors don't need to be reopened. Instead, she set the phone down and went back to her tea. Outside, a few kids were laughing, throwing leaves in the air. Rachel watched them for a moment, not with envy, but peace. Karma hadn't arrived screaming. It had whispered. Just enough for the right people to hear it. And Rachel? She was finally listening to something else entirely. Her own silence, no longer empty, but whole. Late one evening, Rachel sat curled up on her couch, a quiet lo-fi playlist humming in the background as she sorted through paperwork for her new position. The soft glow of the city lights flickered through the window, but her attention shifted when she saw a new email notification. Subject: You deserved better, from someone who knew her well. It was from Megan Wallace, Kayla's former best friend from college. They hadn't spoken in years. Rachel hesitated for a moment before opening it. Hi Rachel. You probably don't remember me, but I was close with Kayla back in college. I've been following what happened from the sidelines, and I wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago. I'm sorry. Kayla was always jealous of you. Of your calmness. Your job. The way you didn't need attention to feel like you mattered. She used to say you were too perfect, but what she meant was that you made her feel small without trying. I didn't speak up before because, well, I was afraid of her too. But it never sat right with me. I found these old screenshots from a private Facebook group we were in back in 2016. She used to mock you, your clothes, your voice, even how you signed birthday cards. I'm sending them not to hurt you, But so you'll know, it was never about you. It was always her. Again, I'm sorry. Megan. Rachel scrolled through the attached screenshots slowly, mean-spirited jokes, half-laughs in comment threads, exaggerated impressions of things she'd said. And yet, her eyes remained dry. No pain. No shock. Just confirmation. Proof of what her gut had whispered for years but she'd always shoved aside out of love, out of duty, out of denial. She didn't reply to Megan right away. She didn't need to. Instead, she created a folder on her desktop titled, Foreclosure, Not Revenge. Then she closed her laptop, exhaled softly, and whispered into the quiet, "It was never me." And somehow, that small truth carried the weight of freedom. A chilly autumn afternoon found Rachel sitting at her favorite corner table in a small cafe, nursing a cup of herbal tea. The soft murmur of conversations around her faded into the background as her phone buzzed insistently. The caller ID flashed a name she hadn't wanted to see again, Kayla. Rachel hesitated but answered. Kayla's voice was shaky, almost pleading. "Rachel, can we meet? Please. I want to talk." Later, they sat across from each other in a quiet booth, the tension thick but fragile, like a thin glass about to crack. Kayla pulled out an envelope, sliding it toward Rachel. "I'm sorry," she began, voice trembling. "I know money won't fix this, but here, it's $75,000. The baby, she needs an aunt. Don't you want to be part of her life?" Rachel's gaze didn't waver. She folded her hands calmly on the table and said softly, "You didn't care when my world was breaking. When my trust shattered and I was left alone. Why should I fix yours now?" Kayla's eyes welled with tears, but Rachel didn't rise to the bait. She didn't shout or argue. She simply shook her head, stood up and whispered, "Sometimes peace isn't loud. Sometimes peace is choosing to close the door quietly and walking away." Rachel left the cafe with a strange lightness in her chest, a gentle healing beginning to take root. She wasn't bound by bitterness or anger. Instead, she carried a quiet strength, a resolve to protect herself and build her own peace. As she stepped out into the crisp air, the city seemed to breathe alongside her, vast, open, full of possibility. In letting go, Rachel found the first step toward freedom. And that, she knew, was worth more than any apology or check could ever buy. 1 year had passed since the night everything fell apart. Now, Rachel sat quietly in her new apartment in Seattle, a city of gentle rain and fresh starts. The soft glow of a single candle flickered beside her, casting warm shadows across the room. She held a glass of deep red wine in one hand, her reflection shimmering on the surface. The weight of the past year settled into a quiet peace. It was her 34th birthday, but there were no loud parties, no forced smiles, no bitter silences. Just her. And that was enough. Rachel smiled softly to herself, feeling the subtle strength that had grown within her. She raised her glass in a silent toast, to herself, to the journey she had survived, to the woman she had become. Setting the glass down, she reached for her journal, the pages worn from months of pouring out thoughts, fears, and hopes. Her pen moved gently, tracing words that felt like a bomb. "Being the strong one doesn't mean never breaking," she wrote. "It means having the courage to rebuild when no one believed you could. It means standing tall, even when the world tries to tear you down. And most of all, it means choosing yourself every single day." Outside, soft snow began to fall, dusting the city in white, quiet, steady, and pure. Rachel watched the flakes drift lazily through the window, feeling a quiet renewal inside her. It was a symbol, she thought, of letting go and starting fresh. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Lena, her closest friend and unwavering supporter. "Thank you for being my real sister." As she sent the message, Rachel realized something profound. Family isn't defined by blood or shared history. Family is those who hold you up, who see your pain and still choose to stay. Family is the people who refuse to let you bleed alone. For the first time in a long while, Rachel felt whole. Her past didn't define her, it strengthened her. The betrayal, the loss, the heartache, they were chapters of her story, but not the whole book. Ahead lay pages waiting to be written with hope, courage, and love on her own terms. And as she blew out the candle, she made a silent promise to herself to keep growing, keep healing, and above all, keep choosing peace. This was her birthday, not a lonely one, but a new beginning. If Rachel's story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe for more powerful, true life-inspired stories. Comment below if you've ever had to walk away from people you thought would always be there. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder. You are not alone. And you are not weak for walking away.